Hello everyone, and welcome. Tonight, we are going to travel to a world that has already ended. Not with fire, not with explosions, not with a final battle, but with silence. A silence so slow that no one noticed it happening. Cities did not fall in a single night. Empires did not vanish in flames. Instead, the world simply stopped working. Trade ships stopped arriving. Messengers never came back. Letters were never answered. And one morning, people woke up in the ruins of a civilization that no longer existed. This is the story of the centuries after the world went quiet. And tonight, you will walk through them.
Part 1. The Day After the End. Imagine waking up tomorrow and nothing works anymore. No government, no trade, no distant cities sending food, no armies protecting the roads. But the strange thing is, no one tells you the world has ended, because there is no one left who even knows how to send the message. To most people, life simply became harder, a little more dangerous, a little more uncertain. Year after year, problem after problem, until memory itself began to fade. Part 2. The Shrinking World. Before the collapse, the world was enormous. Tin came from mountains far away. Amber came from distant northern seas. Grain crossed oceans. But after the collapse, the world shrank. A person could live their entire life without traveling further than a day's walk from home. Villages became islands, separated by forests, ruins, and fear. And the roads slowly disappeared. Grass grew over them, stone cracked, bridges fell into rivers, and with every broken road, the world became smaller. Part 3. The Night Fires. Night became something different. Without strong cities, without patrols, without safe roads, darkness returned to the world. Villages began lighting fires at night, not for warmth, but for protection, because beyond the firelight was the unknown, and the unknown was everywhere. Part 4. The Age of Stories. When writing disappears, stories become everything. History turns into legend. Facts turn into myths. Within a few generations, people no longer remembered the great empires. They remembered giants, lost golden cities, gods who once walked the earth. And in a way, they were not wrong, because the ruins were real. Huge walls, broken palaces, crumbling gates, proof that someone had once lived in a greater world. Part 5. Living Among Ruins. Imagine growing up surrounded by buildings that no one knows how to build anymore. Massive stones that no one can move. Walls that feel eternal. Children played in the ruins. Farmers planted fields beside them. And slowly, the impossible became normal. The past turned into mystery, and mystery turned into myth. Part 6. The Slow Return. But something unexpected was happening. In small villages, in forgotten valleys, in quiet coastal towns, people were learning again. New tools, new trade routes, new alphabets. Civilization was not gone, it was sleeping. And slowly, very slowly, it began to wake up. Part 7. The Sound of Iron. At first, iron was rare, hard to shape, hard to find, harder than bronze. But bronze required trade, tin from distant lands, copper from far mountains, and the trade routes were gone. Iron did not need empires. It waited quietly in the soil, hidden beneath villages, beneath forests, beneath forgotten roads. And slowly, people learned to pull strength from the earth beneath their feet. Part 8. The New Blacksmith. In the old world, blacksmiths served kings. In the new world, they served villages. A single forge became the heart of a settlement. Farmers brought broken tools. Hunters brought bent spearheads. Warriors brought damaged blades. The blacksmith did not build empires, but without him, no village survived the winter. Part 9. Seasons became everything. When global trade vanished, the seasons became rulers. Spring meant hope. Summer meant labor. Autumn meant survival. Winter meant silence. A single bad harvest could end a village. A single long winter could erase a generation. The sky became more powerful than any king had ever been. Part 10. The wild returned. Without cities pushing back the forests, nature began to return. Forests swallowed roads. Fields turned into wilderness. Ruins became homes for animals. Wolves walked where merchants once traded. Owls nested in broken towers. Rivers changed their paths. The world did not miss civilization. It simply continued without it. Part 11. The quiet seas. The seas were once full of ships, merchant ships, warships, messengers. After the collapse, the horizon became empty. Fishing boats stayed close to shore. No one sailed far anymore. The ocean became mysterious again, a vast, dark unknown. Part 12. Fear of distance. Distance became dangerous. Travel meant risk. Risk meant death. Bandits ruled the roads. Storms ruled the seas. Rumors ruled the imagination. And so the world shrank even more. People stopped asking what was beyond the horizon. Part 13. Homes of wood and clay. Stone cities were memories. The new world built with wood, with clay, with straw and mud. Homes became smaller, simpler, temporary. People no longer built for eternity. They built for survival. Part 14. The language of firelight. Night gatherings became sacred. Stories told around firelight were more valuable than gold. This was how knowledge survived, how warnings traveled, how wisdom lived on. Without libraries, the human voice became the archive.
Part 15. Warriors without kingdoms. War did not disappear, but it changed. No massive armies, no grand campaigns, only small conflicts, village against village, raiders against farmers. War became personal, and therefore, more frightening. Part 16. Stars as guides. Without maps, without safe roads, without written directions, the stars returned as guides. Travelers watched the sky like their ancestors once did. Ancient knowledge resurfaced. Forgotten skills became essential again. Part 17. Wealth redefined. Gold lost its meaning. You cannot eat gold. You cannot burn gold. You cannot plant gold. Wealth became simple. Grain, animals, land, family. Survival became the only currency. Part 18. The mountain villages. Some communities retreated to mountains and hills. Higher ground meant safety, natural walls, clear views of approaching danger. Isolation became protection, and protection became peace. Part 19. Children of the New World. Children born in this age never knew the old world. They did not miss empires. They did not miss trade routes. They did not miss palaces. To them, this was normal. The ruins were simply part of the landscape, like mountains, like rivers, like the sky. Part 20. The first travelers return. Generations passed. Fear slowly softened. Curiosity returned. A traveler arrived from far away, then another, then a trader. Stories spread again, and with stories came possibilities. Part 21. The first new trade. A village traded grain for salt. Another traded wool for metal. Small exchanges became habits. Habits became roots. And roots became the beginning of a new world. Part 22. The return of paths. At first, they were only trails. Thin lines pressed into the earth by the feet of travelers. One village to another, one valley to the next. Then carts began to follow. Animals carried goods. Strangers became familiar faces. The world was still small, but it was no longer silent. Part 23. Markets without walls. There were no grand marketplaces,
No marble columns, no city gates, only open fields where people gathered. Once every season, sometimes once a year, farmers arrived with grain, hunters arrived with skins, blacksmiths arrived with tools. For a single day, the world felt larger again. Part 24. The Rise of Craft. With time, some hands became skilled. Potters shaped clay into beauty. Weavers turned wool into warmth. Carpenters learned the language of wood. Skill became reputation. Reputation became travel. And slowly, the idea of profession returned. Part 25. Nights of Music. When survival becomes possible, music returns. Simple drums, wooden flutes, voices singing stories. The night fires no longer meant only fear. They also meant gathering, celebration, memory. Part 26. The Riders. Horses changed everything. Distance shrank again. Messages traveled faster. Danger could be outrun. The rider became a symbol of connection, a bridge between worlds. Part 27. The First New Wealth. Barter ruled for generations, but slowly something new appeared. Objects meant not for use, but for exchange. Rings, metal pieces, symbols of value, the first whispers of currency. Part 28. Settlements grow. Villages became towns. Towns built walls. Walls built confidence. Confidence built ambition. People dared to plan for a future beyond winter. Part 29. The Return of Writing. At first, only symbols. Marks on clay. Signs carved in wood. Records of trade. Lists of grain. Names of people. Writing returned quietly, not as art, but as necessity. Part 30. Memory becomes history. With writing came memory, and with memory came history. The past was no longer only stories. It became something that could be preserved. Part 31. The First Brave Sailors. Someone eventually looked at the sea and decided to try again. Small boats, short journeys, coastal travel. The horizon became less frightening. Part 32. Discovering neighbors. New travelers returned with news. Other villages, other towns, other people rebuilding. The world was not empty. It had simply been quiet. Part 33. The New Leaders. Without kings, communities led themselves. But over time, strong voices rose. Protectors, organizers, decision-makers. Leadership returned, slowly, carefully. Part 34. Building in stone again. Wood rots, clay crumbles, stone endures. And one day, someone decided to build in stone again. Not a palace, not yet, but something meant to last. Part 35. Signals across distance. Smoke signals, horn calls, beacon fires. Ways to warn, ways to gather, ways to connect. Communication expanded beyond the village. Part 36. The Birth of Ambition. Survival creates stability. Stability creates dreams. Dreams create ambition. And ambition begins civilizations. Part 37. The First. New roads. Trails became paths. Paths became roads. Stones were placed carefully. Bridges rebuilt slowly. Travel stopped being an act of courage and became an act of routine. The world stretched its limbs again. Part 38. The Growing Town Squares. In the center of new towns, spaces were left open. Not for defense, not for storage, but for gathering. Places to speak, to argue, to celebrate. The idea of community was becoming visible again. Part 39. The First New Laws. Conflict grows where people gather, and so rules returned. Simple at first. Who owns the land? Who protects the fields? What happens when harm is done? Justice returned before kingdoms did. Part 40. Fire as industry. The forge grew larger. More tools, more weapons, more skill. Fire was no longer only protection. It became production, the heartbeat of progress. Part 41. Knowledge Seekers. Some people began asking questions. How do crops grow better? How can tools last longer? Why do the seasons change? Curiosity returned, and curiosity is the seed of every civilization. Part 42. The Long Traders. Journeys stretched further, weeks instead of days, months instead of weeks. Traders carried stories along with goods. Ideas traveled faster than armies ever could. Part 43. The First New Temples. People sought meaning in a changing world. Simple shrines became temples. Offerings returned. Rituals returned. Faith gave comfort to a rebuilding world. Part 44. The Return of Art. Walls gained color. Pottery gained patterns. Clothing gained decoration. Beauty returned once survival allowed it. Art is the luxury of stability. Part 45. Mapping the world again. Travelers began to record routes, rivers, mountains, safe paths. The world slowly transformed from mystery into geography. Part 46. Organized defense. Raids did not disappear, but towns prepared. Watchtowers rose, walls strengthened, warriors trained together. Fear began losing its power. Part 47. Surplus and storage. Harvests improved. Storage buildings grew larger. Food lasted longer. For the first time in centuries, people planned for years ahead, not just seasons. Part 48. The Birth of Diplomacy. When settlements grow strong, they begin to talk. Alliances formed, agreements made, promises exchanged. Peace became a strategy. Part 49. Monuments of confidence. Structures rose higher, taller than homes, stronger than walls. Not for defense, but for identity. Proof that the future was being trusted again. Part 50. The Busy Harbors. The sea grew alive once more. Sails on the horizon, voices on the docks, goods from distant shores. The world was reconnecting. Part 51. The End of the Long Night. Generations had passed since the world went silent. Most people no longer remembered the fall. They only knew the rise. Civilization had not returned as it once was. It had become something new, and the long night quietly faded into history. Part 52. Children of a New Age. A child born now would never know the silence. They would grow up in towns, hear stories of distant lands, see travelers pass through the gates. To them, the world was expanding, not ending. Part 53. The memory of collapse fades. The collapse became a story, then a legend, then a myth. Warnings turned into tales. Lessons turned into folklore. The greatest catastrophe in history slowly disappeared from memory. Part 54. Peaceful generations. There came a time when entire lifetimes passed without seeing the ruins burn, without hearing of cities falling. For the first time in centuries, peace felt normal. Part 55. Roads without fear. Travelers walked roads without gripping their weapons. Caravans grew larger. Journeys grew longer. Distance no longer meant danger. It meant opportunity. Part 56. The Return of Big Questions. When survival becomes routine, the human mind looks upward. Questions returned. Who are we? Why are we here? What lies beyond the horizon? Philosophy was born from stability. Part 57. Cities rise again. Towns became cities. Markets filled with voices. Temples filled with prayers. Harbors filled with ships. Humanity was building upward again. Part 58. Writing becomes knowledge. Writing was no longer only records. It became stories, poetry, history. The human voice found permanence. Words began to outlive their speakers. Part 59. Ambition returns. With growth came ambition. With ambition came rivalry. New powers emerged. New conflicts began. The cycle continued, as it always had. Part 60. The endless pattern. Rise, fall, silence, return. Civilizations move like tides, retreating, returning, again and again. Part 61. The lessons unlearned. Each generation believes it stands at the peak. Each generation believes its world will last forever. And each generation is eventually proven wrong.
Part 62. Echoes of the past. Beneath every city lie older cities. Beneath every road lie forgotten paths. The past never disappears. It waits quietly beneath our feet. Part 63. A familiar feeling. If this story feels familiar, it is because it is. The fears, the uncertainty, the fragile connections. These feelings are timeless. Part 64. The fragile miracle. Civilization is not permanent. It is a fragile miracle held together by cooperation, by trust, by shared belief, and by hope. Part 65. The quiet warning. The people of the first dark age never knew they lived in one. They only knew their world was changing. Slowly, quietly, unavoidably. Part 66. Tonight and long ago. And now, thousands of years later, we sit in the glow of our own lights, surrounded by our own systems, our own roads, our own connections, listening to the echoes of the past. Part 67. The long view of time history does not move in straight lines. It moves in waves, and every wave carries the memory of the one before it. Part 68. A world that continues. The story never truly ends. It only pauses between chapters, between rises, between falls, between nights and mornings. Part 69. The last firelight. Imagine a fire burning in a quiet village long ago. Voices telling stories. Stars above. Darkness beyond the hills. That fire still burns. In every city. In every home. In every generation. Part 70. Closing words. The world once went silent, and humanity learned how to speak again. Slowly, patiently, together. And somewhere, in the distant future, someone may tell the same story about us. Good night.